Got 20 seconds. Come on, Amanda, go.
Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Good. Get those knees up. Explode. Good. Explode. Let's go. Up.
Rock forward. Let's go. One more. Go.
This is the Fight Strength Podcast, NSFW on Breaking Muscle. Hello again, my fighting and fitness fans, and welcome to a new edition of the Fight Strength Podcast, NSFW on Breaking Muscle. I am Jason Burgos, contributor for both SureDog and MMAsucker.com, and of course, I'm joined once again by the very busy and very bearded traveling strength and conditioning grandmaster of American Top Team, Phil Daru. Phil, what is going on?
Good evening, Jason.
Oh, I like that. I like it.
You like that? So I listen. I've been listening to a lot of Jocko Willink, and that's how they start their show. So there's good evening.
They're very refined. I
very
respect
refined
and appreciate refined.
Yes.
So
yeah, I'm good. But anyways, I'm good. It's been a long day. Like always. But it's all good. I enjoy my life. I enjoy what I do. So it's not a long and grueling day. It's just a long day, and a lot of things going on, man. I'm super busy. Mm-hmm. That's why we haven't been doing a lot of podcasting recently. But I mean, we got them out. We got FSP overtime.
We're doing that weekly stuff.
That wasn't bad. Yeah, we're still on it. We're still good. We got a lot of good guests coming up in the near future. Also, one that we have on tonight, which is awesome. But yeah, a lot of big things. Also, want to go ahead and preface that, our ebook is still out. You can check it out on DaruStrong.com. Weight Cut Systematic Strategies by Tony Ricci and myself, and edited by yours truly, Jason Burgos.
Yes.
Very, very articulate guy right there.
That is my middle name, Articulate. It really is.
Yeah, love that guy living in the boroughs over there. The New York guy.
You got to be articulate when you're living in the hood. You really have to be.
I'm telling you, there's only a few. You gotta hold it down. But and then in a couple weeks, man, like I said, I'll be going out. If you're in Burbank, California, I'm going out there. Meet PJ Nestler, Dan Gardner, Engineering Combat Athletes. We got the seminar. Hope to see a lot of strength coaches out there, a lot of fighters in general, even a lot of skills coaches. I want a lot of those skills coaches to come out, just to understand the processes of what we do, man. If we get guys that coach the skills practice, what I mean by that is like wrestling coaches, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coaches, boxing coaches, things like that can understand what we do from a physical preparation standpoint, just makes our lives a lot easier, and it helps the fighter out tremendously. So if they can understand why we're doing what we're doing and not just being, a personal trainer or and I don't want to bash PTs, but, I'm not out there counting reps and sets. I'm actually fully coaching these guys. And that's what we try to bring to the table when it comes down to physical preparation in combat sports. So if they can understand that process, then I think it'll be a better, well-rounded approach to the entire system. So hopefully we can get some of those out there. Clinicians, you're always welcome. I love my physical therapist. I do a lot of my corrective exercises. Also, like I said, we're going to be having on a guy that I actually follow very, very closely, and I'm certified in some of his systems, functional range conditioning and functional range release and other forms of that. So, it's going to be good, man. I'm going to be giving you a lot of good content. So will PJ and Dan. And then after that, we got King Mo Lawal, man, fighting for Bellator. So I'm going to San Jose I'm actually going to California 3 weekends in a row.
Nice.
So I'll be going back and forth from Florida to California for 3 weeks straight, which is going to be, I'm putting on my miles, man, putting up the air miles for sure. And then in June, I'm going to Poland. We're going to Poland finally. I got the Combat Sports Performance Summit. I'll be out there doing my thing. And then in July, I'm going back to Chechnya. It's going down, Russia. And then October, we have Singapore. And then in between there, I'm probably going to go back to Vancouver. So anybody who's listening, just know those dates and understand that I am coming. I'm coming for it.
Well, also, you forgot the one at your own facility in Florida.
This is very true. Jason. That's why I have you.
I have my.
You see my calendar. It's got a lot of markups, man. But yeah, I do have one in my private facility in little old Stuart, Florida. So if you want to come out to the sunny side of Florida and check me out, I'll be doing a private seminar. Just doing, just 20 and under. Not doing a whole lot of people. Just want to make it a little bit more private, more intimate. Get questions and answers going, and
so it's like Phil Drew unplugged.
Yeah, I'm me.
We have a guitar, hopefully.
We might have some beers. Be outstanding.
I mean, that'll be a part of your nutrition part of the demonstration.
You need the hops. You need the carbs post workout.
There you go.
Guarantee it's part of the vertical diet. Yeah, I'm definitely down for that. But in general, man, we're gonna be going over a lot of stuff, a lot of good content. And also I'll be going through a full, everybody sees my special exercises that I do with my fighters. So, I mean, I've been getting a lot of questions on that. And even somebody dubbed one of the exercises that I do the Daru press, which is fucking awesome. Somebody actually named the exercise after me. I'm on my way. I'm almost there, Jason. See that? We almost at the top.
I just like they use dub. For the young buckaroos out there that don't know dub, back in the day when you had video recorder, you had the tape. You heard something on the radio. Like, oh, I don't got that. Let me you put the tape in and you record it, or your homeboy got the album on tape. He give it to you. You put the record in both double tape. That's how you dub. But the young bucks don't know about that. They don't know about that.
Listen, you trying to say I aged myself just now?
Yes, and you younger than me.
You're right. I got an old soul, man. My wife is 8 years older than me, bro.
She knows about dubbing. She knows about dubbing. She knows about the record button on the VCR.
Shit, she might know about 8-tracks, but I'm not going to say.
Oh, man. I hope she's
not listening. Man, I'm in trouble. Fuck.
Damn.
She won't listen to this.
No,
I hope not.
She's whack. I mean, but let's, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, this week's edition of the show, we will be joined by Dr. Andreo Spina. Spina is the creator of the Functional Range Release Soft Tissue Management System, the Functional Range Conditioning Mobility Development System, and Kinstretch. I mean, it's a pretty groundbreaking stuff. We're going to talk about some of the organizations in professional sports that actually use these systems. But I mean, Phil, you are a follower of here, a big time fan, a true believer, if you will. Like, when did you first come into knowledge of Dr. Spina and his techniques and learn about him and then get involved with them yourself?
Yeah, so I seen a couple of Instagram videos with a couple of fighters that I actually follow, that I was working with virtually over online, and then I ended up going to a seminar over in Boston by it was Mike Boyle's seminar, and he has a gym out there, and then a couple of his guys that work with judo guys, and a trainer there that's kind of like an intern, but also he's an MMA fighter. So he was telling me about it, and then he asked me, do I know who Dr. Andreo Spina was? And I didn't know the name, but I knew what he did, and I knew kind of like it was based around movement systems, and I knew there was kind of like it was either like a mix between I want to say a mix between yoga and just maybe a little bit, actually a mix between yoga, Pilates, and like just formal movement patterns, So I was like, all right, let me check it out. And then it kind of reminded me a lot of what we have to do as far as like getting ready for jiu-jitsu practice, like as far as our warm-ups go. A lot of the movement qualities, a lot of the what they call animal exercises, basically. We're doing like bear crawls and crab walks and things like that, and just basically trying to move the body in multi-directional, multifaceted movement patterns. And I was liking it. I took a liking to it, and I finally was able to catch a seminar and a certification because it was close nearby and actually had a little bit of time on my hands. And I caught one in Tampa, Florida, which is only like maybe 2.5 hours from me. So I was like, perfect, let me go out there and get it done. And then, I started to work on that with my fighters, and a lot of them that you see, with the controlled articular rotations that we done, the end range holds, end range release, things like that, pills and rails, all this stuff we're gonna go over with Dre. But I've done this with all of my fighters, not just, who you seen on my Instagram feeds or whatever. We've seen tremendous increases in mobility and movement quality and overall performance and reduced injury risk. So like, I was like, man, this is something that I need to have. And I'm also like looking to further my knowledge in it and get more certifications in it just because I believe in it. And I feel like it's something that's missing in combat sports performance, and it's something that I need to give to other coaches because, like I said, before in other podcasts, man, it's like these fighters get fixed or they get set in these fixed positions due to skills practice, and we got to get them moving like true humans so they can understand or at least know how to move their body in space when in all facets of human movement, not just skill specific. And you're also making sure that you're conditioning the joints, you're conditioning the body and the tissues to withstand force and load under pressure and within real time. So I think that this is something that's going to be very beneficial for any combat sport athlete, any athlete in general, but just because, this is my primary basis of who I work with. And I also do it with my regular clients, my general public who sit at desks all day or very stressed out from daily life, and I work with a lot of dentists, I work with a lot of nurses, a lot of doctors, and they can understand why we do it. And they're just and they're the same thing, man. They're just tight hips, tight back, things like that, because that's what they do on a daily basis. They're always on the go, or they're always sitting at a desk, or they're always sitting in their car. So I try to freely, move their body in ways that they can do it on their own and not be passive and actually, increase active range of motion through these movement patterns or systems.
I mean, well, also I would like to mention, you find all of our previous editions of the Fight Train podcast, including this Breaking Muscle exclusive episode with guests like Joe DeFranco, Dr. Andy Galpin, PJ Nestler, and Zach Evanesh on iTunes, Spotify, Player FM, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, and on YouTube. I mean, please share, comment, leave us ratings, and all that stuff on those streaming services. Before we get to Dr. Spina, I wanted to ask a quick question. I first, wanted to chat about the Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje fight from the last weekend, which you had a major investment in. I mean, your thoughts. We're now almost a week removed from that fight. What were your thoughts on the whole thing, since you train and are very close friends with Mr. Poirier?
Oh man, I feel the gold is coming. I feel it. I feel like we are just at like arm's reach of getting Habib, my bad. Yeah, but I was really impressed. I wasn't really impressed because I know Dustin's abilities, I was happy with his performance, and I was glad that people got to see a little bit more of what he does from a technical standpoint. And even though he did at times get in his brawling mindset or he was throwing a little bit wild at times, and he didn't, or quote unquote check the leg kicks. And that's an issue that, people don't really understand. At the same time, I think that he did great. I think that he weathered the storm. He showed that he was a true warrior, like he is, a true fighter, but he also showed poise, persistence, perseverance. And he also, like I said, he didn't go crazy when it was time to put him away, which was awesome. Like I seen him same thing what happened with Eddie when he hurt Eddie. Mm-hmm. Yep. He went crazy, and it got him caught. So like with this, you can tell that he learns from his quote unquote mistakes, I guess. And Gaethje didn't do so. I mean, you thought Gaethje, all he had to really do a lot of the times, man, shoot for a fucking takedown, man. Like, do something other than try to brawl and go punch for punch. At the end of the day, man, CTE is real. Yeah. But I think that he showed that he was a true fighter. It opened a lot of people's eyes, I hope, and then in all generalness, I just seen it on Twitter. Ali, his Habib's manager, was basically saying it's either GSP, Conor, or Dustin. Everybody else can shut up. So I was like, all right, cool. Dustin retweeted it. He said, let me get that. And So I mean, hopefully we'll see what happens, man. But like I said, I was real pleased, and obviously we have always something to work on. There's always something to work on.
Yeah.
I was pleased with his conditioning. Obviously, he's always had top-notch conditioning. We're not worried about that. I was also pleased with his muscular and strength endurance, where a lot of times that was our main issue. A lot of the times because he's so slow twitch dominant, he has a high VO2 max where he has the ability to consume oxygen very efficiently, but as far as strength endurance, it's hard for him to carry throughout long duration. We finally fixed that problem due to proper preparation, due to starting from 16 weeks out. We literally were doing out of camp programming 16 weeks out from in before we even knew we had Gage. He was training, he was doing his physical preparation, getting his body ready for the demands ahead. And this way, when he came into camp, when he moved, or when he came to ATT, he usually lives in Louisiana now. Mm-hmm. But when he came to ATT, he was already in shape. He was probably like 3 weeks, like from 8 weeks out, he was 3 weeks out from peaking. So I had to kind of coast him throughout the entire 8 to 6 weeks, and then we gave him a deload. We deloaded him on the 4 weeks out, and then he had a super compensation at 3 weeks out because he was already rested. So he had a stimulus recoverable adaptation, and from there, man, we just kind of coasted him in. You could kind of see it in my later videos because it's all documented. If you look at my Instagram, you look at my YouTube, we went from 8 weeks out all the way to about 2 weeks out. And within 2 weeks out, man, he was moving fast. Speed was on point. His movement patterns were definitely way better. His power was still there, and his strength still was there too. So I mean, and also, integrating Nick and Mind Buddy One and doing the cognitive conditioning, mm-hmm. that was keeping his mind sharp, and it was also giving us the ability to train even when he was physically exhausted, but not mentally exhausted. So that was also a good add-on to the camp.
Yeah, I mean, it's very impressive watching his maturity level change in the last few years. I think he's now 8-1 or 7-1 since he moved to 155, which is extremely impressive. I mean, just his growth as how he fights from a more exciting brawler kind of type to now he's much more well-rounded. Like you said, he didn't go wild when he hurt Gaethje, and it's great to see the maturity as a man, as a fighter. Just great. It's crazy how the UFC put themselves in such a weird position with bad luck and Conor McGregor, but he without a doubt, Dustin completely deserves a title shot. But I would be wrong if I didn't say I felt bad for Tony Ferguson, because the guy tripped from an accident during an interview scheduled by the UFC and tears his ligament, and now he was the champion, doesn't even get a title shot. So it's a tough spot. I feel bad for anybody who doesn't get the shot. Hopefully it is for Dustin, because that would be cool, would be different and new and refreshing. And I just think Habib and Ferguson is just cursed. But then who knows? Conor McGregor may show up, and then that changes everything, and then Dustin and Ferguson have to wait, which is real bullshit.
Well, that's what's gonna happen there. They'll probably give us Ferguson.
That would be crazy. And as a fan, I would love it. I would be very grateful, but I would still feel bad because that means the loser, who really should have been Ferguson fighting Habib, and then that guy should have been fighting Dustin Poirier in a few months. Now one of them is going to lose out after a lot of work, but that is the way it goes, and that is MMA and sports in a nutshell. Yeah,
for sure, man. I'm looking forward to it. I think that any fight is a good fight for us, but it's easier to get out of bed and really train. I mean, for him, he does it anyways, but I'm going to be like, all right, we got Habib, let's ride. But even if we get Ferguson or Kevin Lee or even Barbosa, I mean, those are all names that could be drawn out the hat to go fight. I mean, but Dana did say we are in the running.
Yeah.
And I knew it, and I said, well, listen, man, I was like, it's funny because I think you had posted something on it, and I wanted to smack you a little bit.
What?
But I can't say because I like you a lot, so I'm not going to do it.
Well, you can't. You're in Florida, so you can't do nothing.
I will go through this fucking microphone and grab you. Anyways.
Please tell me about this smackable. What happened?
No, man, because I was literally ready to get the call to hear that Dustin was going to Brooklyn to get the fight. And you were like, well, that's not fair. And you said that it would mess up the card.
Was that wrong though?
No, you was not wrong, but don't say that, man.
Why? It's not he reading it or DW. DW's your boy. He's not my boy. He's not reading it.
Yeah, he might. We're getting up there.
No, he's not.
Nah, but like, I knew that was gonna happen because it would have messed up the card. And
yeah, if he was co-main event, he totally, I think they would have got a call. But you can't just ruin a whole other show, you know. And look, we would have lost out on such a great fight, and I think that fight with Gaethje even blew up his name even more. So, and you know what, I like Dustin. He's been on the show before. Good guy, earned a shot. I don't want to see him get a shot on like 7 days notice. It's not fair to him. He should deserve an entire camp to really take this opportunity. This is his first title shot. I'm glad that I'd rather see him get the time to do it.
No, you're right, and that was and I could totally understand, and I do like that, you know what I mean. And we were getting ready for Gaethje. It's totally different.
Yeah, big time difference.
Totally different team, you know, totally different camp, totally different approach.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get you.
It is now time for our guest. He's the creator of the Functional Range Release System, the Functional Range Conditioning Mobility Development System, and the Kinstretch method of movement. These groundbreaking techniques and certifications are used by notable professional sports organizations like the New York Rangers, Houston Astros, Portland Trail Blazers, Los Angeles Lakers, Nike, and even the Onnit Academy. Not only is he mastered in these techniques, he's even a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. To learn more about these systems, you can watch a plethora of his videos on his YouTube page, or learn more at functionalanatomyseminars.com. But we are very lucky to have him on the show this week. He is Dr. Andreo Spina. Thank you for being a guest this week, Dr. Spina. Oh, excuse me, Dre.
Yeah, you know what? I have to stop you right away. I am not a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Phil told me you were.
Oh man, he's a black belt in my mind, man.
I'm a black belt in Kempo Karate, and I've been studying Taekwondo and striking arts since I was about 5 years old. But I am actually a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Nice.
Yeah. Well, there we go right there. You know what's even funnier is that I actually started in Kempo Karate, so that makes a lot of sense. So I already could tell we connected in that way automatically.
I knew there was something.
Exactly, man.
Yeah.
So Dre, for the people that may not know, I mean, you know, Jason kind of hit on it a little bit, but you know, let the listeners know exactly, you know, what's your background of yourself and how you began to develop functional range systems that I use, you know, consistently throughout all my training sessions and for my fighters.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, going back to what we were just talking about earlier. So I've been studied martial arts since the time I can remembering things, and you know, past that, I think I started studying the human body for that purpose of trying to improve my performance, which quickly, you know, as you get older, has to turn into some kind of job, or in my mind, it did. So I went into chiropractic. So I did a background degree in kinesiology. And then I went and studied chiropractic and became a chiropractor, as well as an acupuncturist. And you know, it's a long story that kind of boils down to I was obsessed with actually fully understanding what it is that I was trying to do as both a chiropractor and a trainer from a scientific perspective, and being genuinely unhappy with the answers that I was receiving. So that started me on a very long path of trying to answer, set out clear, logical questions and trying to answer those questions using scientific literature. And I always tell people I never wanted to, you know, start systems, and I never intended on traveling and teaching systems. I really just was selfish in regards to that, in wanting to know what I was doing and not being happy with what I was hearing. So I really took a bird's eye view of the scientific literature with regards to how to heal the human body, but that actually became how to control the human body in order to improve performance. And what I teach, and what I always tell people I teach, is my interpretation of what I think the science is telling us to do with regards to how to make people control themselves much more effectively and safely.
Nice.
So I mean that like you said, that spiraled into developing a system of assessing and treating for injuries, and then that became functional range conditioning, which is the teaching people how to assess the body in terms of how to make people control themselves better, and then Kinstretch kind of spiraled off of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's actually something that I'm going to go get certified in a couple of weeks down in Costa Mesa. So I'll be out there getting a Kinstretch certification. So hopefully I may see you. If I don't, it's all good. I understand you're a busy man.
Yeah, I don't know where. Nowadays they give me plane tickets and the week before tell me to show up. So
I hear you. I think Hunter and Dewey are going to be out there for that one.
I believe. Yeah, Dewey leads the Kinstretch, who is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and actually traded me for my blue belt. So there's a little bit of information for you.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to go roll with him when I get out there, and we'll see.
You picture rolling with an amazing black belt who's ridiculously mobile.
I know, man. That's like almost an anomaly. You can't really get that a lot of times.
He said something funny the other day. He said, mobility is like having the cheat codes in Contra. If you remember that video.
Yes.
And when you roll him, it's like how did your foot end up across my head? Like, how is that even possible?
Yeah. Yeah. So Drake, can you give the listeners a true definition of what the difference is between flexibility and true mobility, and why it's important for athletes to attain these functions?
Yeah. So if you actually go back to the root word of mobility, it actually comes from the Latin word movere, which means to move. And because of that, there's an active component to what you're saying. When you're saying I'm mobile, you're saying I'm able to access and utilize my flexibility via the guidance of your own nervous system. So it's an active component to your capacity to create movement. When you're talking about flexibility, you're really talking about the passive ability to achieve a range of motion when you're under the influence of an external force. So when you're doing the splits, for example, the external force is gravity, which is putting you into that position. Now, bringing this back to fighters, because I tend to always do that, if I'm teaching one of my students, how to kick, a lot of students will want to throw those head kicks, and they'll sit there, hours and hours trying to achieve the flexibility that they think would be required to throw a kick. And then you go to try to throw that kick in live combat, and you end up falling on your ass. And I always say that as you're falling, that's when you start to realize the difference between mobility and flexibility. Flexibility is what your body can do passively. Mobility is how much access your nervous system has to your flexibility. Now, why that's important, it's really everything. I mean, there's not a sport that I know of that occurs passively. There's not a worthwhile human activity that I know of that really is done passively, other than taking Instagram photos. But for the most part, you're asking yourself to either control your own weight or to try to control the weight of another person, which is which always has an active component. So just because you're flexible, it doesn't mean you have the strength in those flexible ranges of motion to be able to utilize the flexibility. And probably more importantly, if you ever have to defend that flexibility, i.e., if you have to absorb load as you're displaying this flexibility, if all you've done is taught your body to get there passively, you're not increasing your ability to absorb or create load. So that means, number one, if you can't absorb load, you're going to injure the tissue, because that's what tissue injury is. It's when the load going into a tissue exceeds the ability to absorb. And number two, if you can't create load or power or strength in the flexible range, then you'll never be able to access the flexibility in any live movement.
Yep.
I mean, to have your systems be used by major sports organizations legitimizes it, on a level that just massive. How did all of that come about, that these organizations started using FR and FRC? I mean, who was the first team to use it? How much work did you have to do to make them believers in these systems, and they were seriously stuff they had to take on?
You know what? I did exactly no work in terms of trying to advertise. Once again, I was not ever in the mindset that I want to teach this to pros. Like, in my brain, every human is a professional athlete, whether they know it or not, or whether they want to act that way or not. I mean,
See, I told you, Phil, I'm an athlete too. You didn't believe
Oh
me.
God.
I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, if you weren't, then natural selection would have rubbed you out a long time ago. So, in my mind, it's just make bodies, make people control themselves better. Now, I taught it that way, and I guess I can bring it back. There's one gentleman named Neil Ramp actually, and he now is with the LA Dodgers, but he was with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And that was I don't know how that happened, but he must have come to a course. Maybe he heard of the course through someone else, and this to the Diamondbacks. And of course, I was like, I'm not a baseball guy in the least. But I think that's how I started the seminar. I went there and I was like, as much as I love teaching this, I don't even like watching baseball. But that's how it's. But I mean, of course, I appreciate the sport and all. And it's kind of joking, but in my system, it doesn't matter what you're trying to do with yourself. That's probably a bad sentence too. It doesn't matter what sport you're trying to achieve or what. It works for everyone because it's all about controlling yourself. So I started with him, and from there, I just had another team contact, another team, and then a different sport came. People in pro leagues, they kind of, hockey mingles with baseball, mingles with football, mingles with soccer, kind of thing. And it was honestly it was just a word of mouth type scenario, and yeah, it was of no effort on my own. I'm happy to say, or I'm lazy in saying.
Perfect.
See, a message to the kids out there: you can have success without doing anything. Isn't that good? I mean,
yeah. I mean, honestly, to that's I don't know if that's the message, but in my I just like the topic, and I like to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think when I teach it, that's what occurs. Like as soon as I teach a course, the first thing I always tell people is, look, let's just pretend we're all friends here. Like I'm not going to go up there and pretend I'm above anyone and put on a suit and tie. I'm not that guy. I just I know stuff because I worked my ass off to know it, and people are interested, and I'm humbled every time I have a room full of people who are interested in my perspective. So I give it, and it just so happens that my perspective seems to apply to whatever athletic population you're part of or not part of.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, as your systems and your techniques broaden and they continue to get out there, and is there, for maybe listeners that are athletes out there, are there any particular sports who has the athletes who started to use it have seen like marked improvements in their abilities from getting into FRC, and Kinstretch? Are there maybe any examples of somebody like, oh, he's in this sport and he started using it, and man, it made such a huge difference, just as an example?
Yeah, you know what? I don't know that I want to say people, name people specifically. I'm sure people can look up the athletes that I currently work with and have worked with. But like I said, you give me a baseball player. Let's put it this way: you take any athlete and you take a hockey player. A hockey player can spend too much time on flexibility. Right. Mm-hmm. So in other words, they can spend a lot of time trying to do the splits, which is really not even going to benefit them past a certain point. You can take a basketball player and you can spend too much time making them strong, or you can take a tennis player and spend too much time working on power, which could otherwise be used to improve tennis skill. But the one thing that you can't get too much of is control of yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's why if you give me a fighter, if I break down the fighter and I'm able to tell you, these are the joints that are not working like they should, and when individual joints don't work like they should, then when you ask those joints to play nicely with other joints, mm-hmm. that's not going to work well either. Mm-hmm. That's like a fundamental rule of human movement. So, if I work with the Mariners, I mean, what they're trying to do is they're trying to take their joints and make them function properly. And then once they function properly, you can very easily enhance performance in any way you want. So when I work with an athlete, it's not a matter of will that, will my system make them better? I don't know any other way to do it because my system just follows what I believe the scientific literature is telling us with regards to how to achieve those goals. So you can give me a freaking curler, or you can give me an amateur CrossFitter who does it on the weekends, and really the only difference is going to be, how you program that person, the intensity of the program, the frequency of the training. But really, we're all doing the same things. If your shit doesn't work, then your shit doesn't work.
No, that's very true, man. And people that see me go through the FRC with some of my fighters, and I can honestly say that it made a huge difference in their overall biomechanics, neurological control, along with decreased tissue damage. But Dre, can you explain a bit more on, for the listeners in general, but a bit more about functional range conditioning and what exactly is it, and how or where the prerequisites are for these principles?
Okay, so really, if you take the functional range systems, which is the name that I give to kind of the way that I approach any human being that's put in front of me, what it is a thought process, and the thought process is predicated on the concept that, number one, there's certain things that each joint is supposed to be able to do in order to define it as a well-functioning joint. Now, in a functional range assessment, which is another one of the systems that I teach, we go over the multiple ways that we can define what a shoulder is supposed to be capable of and what it's actually doing. So we start out in the functional range system with assessing people's articulations individually. Now, why individually? That's a really important question, because if you look at most training systems nowadays, it's very sexy to say, I'm only going to work on functional exercises. People always talk about, I only squat, or I only do deadlifts, and they'll walk around someone in a gym who's doing bicep curls, and they'll almost laugh, and they'll say, well, they're not being functional because your shoulder has to work with your hip, has to work with your knee, has to work with your ankle. And I 100% don't disagree. But what I always tell people is that articular independence is necessity in order to have articular interdependence. In other words, if you want your joints to play nice with each other, they have to do their own jobs. So the first thing that we do is assess all of the joints of anyone's body, and we have a way of determining whether or not they're capable of functioning at a basic human level. If not, that's the first entry point with functional range conditioning. We start to assign exercises that will specifically alter human tissue, and in so doing, eventually will alter neurological functioning in order to make that shoulder a human shoulder. Now, once you take a shoulder that's working properly under the definition that we provide, well, then you say, okay, so in order to be an athlete, we actually have to make that shoulder function in almost a superhuman level in order to achieve certain sports. So take a baseball pitcher, for example. You look at what a baseball pitcher's shoulder is doing, and that's not a normal evolutionary function of the human shoulder. Like back in the days of hunter-gatherers, like when you pick up a rock, you chuck it at an animal, the animal's dead. Nobody ever picked up the rock and repeatedly chucked it at the dead animal, putting different spins and curves on the thing. That's not a normal thing to ask of a shoulder. So if you want a shoulder to be able to withstand the hell that is repeatedly pitching a baseball, now you have to look at what is the capacity that's necessary in that shoulder for it to be able to function long term. Mm-hmm. So we start, let's say, at the shoulder, depending on what the assessment tells us, we start to humanize that joint, and then we start to progressively work to increase its capacity. Now, how do we do that? I don't know how many hours we have to speak here, but it's really utilizing fundamental scientific principles that are applied in a logical, systematic way. And that brings me to a point which I don't know if I ever got off in a podcast, but so I'd like to do it here.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
People often say, oh, I saw what he does on Instagram, but that looks like this, or yeah, he's not doing anything new, or he's not reinventing the wheel. And I'm like, yeah, fucker, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. Like, I always tell people, if you come to my seminar and you go, man, that guy was speaking a different language. I have never heard of those concepts before in my life. Then I just made up a whole bunch of crap. So what I want people to do is come to the seminar, and this is what happens every time, and they go, you know what? That is a logical step-by-step method of applying stuff that we know in the scientific literature in order to achieve very specific goals that are clearly what is necessary to bring that athlete to the next level. Like people, they want magic. They want me to tell them that you're going to come here and I'm going to fix your foot in 2 visits and blah, blah, blah. It's like we all work within the realm of physics, right? Like you can't go out of the universal laws and speed things up. So we all function under the same rule. So what we're doing is we're organizing our approach, and we're specifically trying to achieve goals. And when those goals are specifically achieved, it makes the body do better. And when the body does better, whatever you use that body for, it's going to get better because you learn by the way your body functions. Like people talk about the brain and the nervous system, and I want the nervous system to move this way, and I want to change the patterns and put in blah, blah, blah. I mean, your brain is encapsulated in the skull. It's blocked out of the outside world. And it's receiving inputs from receptors in your tissues. That's how it learns. Now, if those receptors and those tissues are of poor quality, then your brain learns poor things, and it's going to output poor human movement. If you can improve the incoming signal, what we call the afferent signal, then you will immediately improve the speed of learning. You'll immediately improve the body's ability to deal with variables. So I don't know if that was a more generic answer, but FRC is the component of that where we start to say, your shoulder doesn't do this. Now we're going to apply these principles, whether it be cars or pails and rails or passive range holds, passive range liftoffs. That brings me to another thing that people are like, what are all these acronyms and why are you making all this stuff up? I'm not making anything up. I'm just giving names so that it's organized in our brain so that when someone has someone in front of them, they can program for them. And if there's one thing that you get from when I lecture, it's I hate random nonsense workouts where people just, I lift things up and put things down and it doesn't do anything. Like there's rep counters and there's trainers. And in FRC, I work with trainers, people who are trying to alter human capacity using progressive adaptations and, working under the laws of the specificity principle and other principles which are very well settled in the scientific world. But there's no magic to what I'm doing. It's just that when you're organized, things happen faster because that's just what the literature tells us to do. That was probably, I don't even remember the question, to be honest with you.
That's fine. I was just sitting there taking notes. I'm probably gonna have to go back and listen to this podcast again. But yeah, thank you, Dre. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, I can go deep.
I hear you, man. That's why we got you on the show, bro. But that makes sense because in this sport and in mixed martial arts in general, there's a lot of like just throw shit at the wall, trying to make it stick type movements and type exercises and things like that, where people like myself and others like I work with are trying to negate that factor and try to actually work on program design and periodization and scheduling and understanding, specificity and auto-regulation techniques and things like that. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. You have to have a structured plan in order to do anything. Otherwise, you're just basically throwing your head against the wall trying to make sure that you don't get knocked the fuck out. But at the same time,
that's 100% right. And you know what? People might like hear that and they might confuse it in saying, well, no, you have to work on movement variability and you have to work on all it. Sure. And I and you are not saying that you don't. It's not that you're not, but when you're trying to take an athlete from point A to point B, randomly learning how to do, I don't know, just, hand balancing because it's cool or random movements because they look very pretty. I mean, that's great. But like you said, we need the person to be able to internally rotate that hip so when they throw their swing, they can put more damage into that meat. And if you want that hip to internally rotate, how are you going to do it, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
a lot of people, the way that, I mean, I always say that a lot of people nowadays, the way that they structure their training is they go on Instagram and they're like, well, let's look at some cool shit to do.
Yeah, that's it right there.
They'll look at like an ex-dancer and they'll go, oh, well, look at how much control they have. I'm like, yeah, dude, that guy's been dancing for fucking his whole life. Of course he can do that. But when you take someone who has, you know, they have a labral tear or they have scar tissue accumulation, then what that requires is science.
Yeah.
Because you can't take someone who's functioning perfectly and say, well, what does he do? It doesn't matter what he does. If you're functioning like hell, you can't go and mimic people who are functioning perfectly. So people grab exercises like they'll grab like a Turkish get-up. They go, oh my God, this is the most functional exercise in the world. Functional for what? Like, who gets out of bed like a Turkish person?
Yeah.
What does that mean that it's functional? That's another thing that I'm confused about. Like, that exercise functional and that exercise is not. Well, it's the person who's has the functional capacity to do the exercise that we should be worried about, not naming whether or not an exercise is functional. The same exercise, you give me two different people, it's a great exercise for one, it's the dumbest exercise for the other. And if you can't tell the difference, then you're just randomly assigning, you're just throwing shit at the wall and hoping it sticks.
Yeah.
And
So the moral,
and I mean, like you said, you can lose in basketball and it sucks. You lose in MMA and someone's life is changing. You know what I mean? They're getting hurt. So I mean, you can't be random.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to sum up what Dre just said, you know, folks, there's levels to this shit, and you gotta know your role and work on your way up. You know what I'm saying? So, but it makes a lot of sense, and even going to the certifications, like, and you've said it before, it's not just exercises. We're not trying to, you know, develop or, you know, put out or give out exercises, you know, for the masses. It's more about principles and taking those principles and actually training and doing it the right way. So I do appreciate the way you go about running it and introducing these principles for these systems that we use now, and what I've been using for, I don't know, the past couple months, and it's been really working. So, I mean, I've been working with fighters for over a decade now, and as a former fighter myself, I know how important it is to understand connective tissue and its role in fight-specific performance. Now, Dre, can you give us a quick overview on the concepts of bioflow and the components of the extracellular matrix?
Sure. So the bioflow concept was really, it's a lecture on anatomy, but I always say that in my seminars you'll have sport medical doctors, you'll have chiropractors, you'll have physiotherapists, you'll have strength and conditioning specialists, you'll have a whole bunch of different people, and what is common to all of us that have studied the human body is that we're really, really good at dead person anatomy. Like, if our clients and patients were cadavers, we would nail that shit, because what do you learn? You learn that this is the bicep and this is where it is on a beautiful colored picture. Or if you have, if you were in chiro school when I was going, you would do cadaver dissection, and you would put a pin in something and say, what is that? And you'd be like, oh, that's the ulnar nerve. Oh, okay, you know your anatomy. Well, no, you don't. You know the anatomy of a cadaver that has been dissected. But what bioflow is a way of trying to lecture and explain to people how human tissue exists in the living person and how that human tissue creates human movement. And one thing that we realize is that the majority of stuff in your body is under the broad category of connective tissue. I mean, this includes all the casings of your muscles, it includes your bones, it includes the fascia, the tendons, the ligaments, the cartilage. I mean, all of the stuff that makes Phil, the majority of it is connective tissue. And if you study connective tissue, what you realize is it's really all the same stuff. It's just different permeations of that stuff. You can break down connective tissue into what we call like cells, and then the cells produce fibers and ground substance, which is kind of the fluid component of your tissues. Now, the difference between a bone and the tendon that inserts into that bone is just a compositional change of what types of fibers, the percentages of fibers, and what types of ground substance. So when people go, where does this muscle come from and go to? It's a weird question. Like I always say, the bicep starts somewhere in the body and inserts into the rest of it. Because really, the bone grows the bicep. The bicep becomes the tendon, which becomes the capsule, So what I'm explaining with BioFlow is that tissue is just the exact same tissue that is in slight deviations or different compositions becomes other tissues. Now, how does the tissue become that tissue? It only becomes one tissue versus another tissue based on the way it's used. The forces that go into a tissue will determine what parts of the genome, what parts of the cellular coding, gets translated into protein. So if you load a tissue, any tissue, if you start loading it like bone, it's going to become bone. If you start loading it like tendon, it becomes tendon. And we have various examples. Like if you take someone who had an ACL reconstruction, so the anterior cruciate ligament is torn. So we'll take a patellar tendon and we'll replace the ligament with a tendon. Now, if you were to go in and biopsy that graft, 10 years after the graft occurs, and you put it under a microscope, what do you see? You no longer see cells and fibers and ground substance that resembles a ligament. It now is, a tendon. It's now ligament. It becomes ligament. Why? Because the forces going into it tell the cells, this is what I need you to be able to withstand. So how does that become important? It becomes important because when you realize that the stuff you're working with is just stuff, and the language that the stuff speaks is force, then if you can master the forces that go into the tissue, you can make real alterations in human tissues. And guess what? It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen by getting your back rubbed for a half an hour and people talking weird things like I'm breaking up your scar tissue and I'm if you want tissue to change, it takes force over time, and none of that happens quickly. And if you want it to happen, you have to know how to apply that force, and you have to know when not to apply that force. And like you said, there's levels to this, and you spoke about the cellular matrix. So if you take any tissue, every tissue is really just a continuation of another tissue. And if you go down to the cellular level, the cells of a tendon, they're connected to all of the other cells in the immediate area as well, through what's called the extracellular matrix. And through the extracellular matrix, that's connected through the cell into the cell, which is the intercellular matrix. And then from the intercellular matrix, it's physically connected into the nucleus of the cell, the internuclear matrix, which is really connected right to the DNA. So when you're assigning an exercise, people are like, oh, I just lift shit up and put it down. No, you're actually dictating what part of the genetic code is going to get translated into protein. Like, trainers' jobs are far more important than they give themselves credit for. Again, that's a crazy answer, but going back, it's the idea that your tissue is listening. It doesn't speak English. It doesn't speak Italian. It speaks force. The cells don't have brains, right? So they don't really know, quote unquote, what they're doing. They're just feeling things. And what they feel is force. That's why I always say force is the language of cells and movement is what you say. And you have to speak clearly if you want stuff to happen. If you have a tendinopathy, if one of your fighters has a tendinopathy and you think that rubbing it or putting magic potions or sprinkling, healing crystals, I don't know what people do. That's not going to change the cellular composition of that tissue. In order to do that, you have to speak the language it speaks. You have to speak force. And there's a difference between, let's talk about soft tissue work. There's a difference between randomly rubbing tissue and hoping for the best versus applying force with the intent of creating a directional message, which will then in sequence start the process of remolding, which needs to be backed up with proper training inputs along the same lines of force in order to reinforce the message that your soft tissue did. So, I mean, we can go into that too, but my soft tissue system is a lot of the same principles as the training system. It's just force application, man. It's just, when I'm applying force to a client, it's soft tissue, therapeutic forces in order to change tissue. When you're doing FRC, it's internal force application, telling them to lift this or do this in a particular way. Again, it's force. It's just force control. You take it to fighting in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that's just a different amount of force control. When you're trying to, now you're just trying to put force to do the opposite and damage the tissue. But all of this lies on a continuum, which is, it's completely understandable under the premise of the bioflow concept.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's particularly important for jiu-jitsu guys, and even just in general with MMA, learning the body in proprioception, joint centration, things like that, but also learning how to move your body freely through space is something that a lot of the fighters lack, you know, because they've been stuck in a sport-specific, technical stance all their life, and they develop these compensation patterns, they develop imbalances and things like that where their joints just get stiff and get stiffened in sometimes in the right ways because they need that certain, I guess, biomechanical feedback, because if they don't do what they need to do in the cage, they're going to get hurt. But they also need to learn how to move like a human, and that's what I try to incorporate into all of my training sessions now, just because I just see so much discrepancies, dysfunction due to sport-specific demands and their skills practice and what happened to them due to that. I mean, there's a lot of kyphotic postures, things like that. I see shoulder problems, hip problems. I mean, we've done videos with King Mo the Wall, who's been in this game forever, and I've been training him.
Legend.
Yeah, and I mean he's got a fight coming up, and people really don't understand how messed up his body is and how still he's able to perform at the highest level. And we've been doing controlled articular rotations. I've been doing some end range holds, some end range hovers, pails and rails, things like that we learn in FRC. And you can definitely see a difference. He feels a difference in his training. Same thing with Dustin Poirier and Joanna Jędrzejczyk. They all feel the difference. They feel more stable. They feel more capable of moving in multi-directional patterns. It's just a better overall outcome. And on top of that, we're at least reducing the risk of injury and non-contact injury, which it shouldn't be at all a case if you're an optimal strength and conditioning coach by any means. If you're a coach and you got guys injured with non-contact injuries, then you're not really doing your job well. So that's why I decided to go and do FRC and actually going and getting Kinstretch and do FRA also, just so I can broaden my base of knowledge with this, because I know it's going to be beneficial for all my athletes and for myself in general.
And you're alluding to a really important point. And by the way, that Poirier fight was crazy, man.
Yeah.
Like, if anybody did, that guy's obviously a champ, but yeah. I mean, his conditioning was top notch. You can see it. So, I mean, that was a great job. But I was going to bring up, I think one thing where people get confused out is the idea that we're training someone's movement. Like, people, they're so focused on, if you're trying to throw a leg kick, I'm trying to teach one of my students how to throw a hook kick, and you're like, well, these are the movements you have to do. Well, if I give you two athletes, right, and I give you one athlete whose hip has, is riddled with connective tissue scarring, possibly has some tearing, labral tearing, maybe an osteophyte developed, connective tissue that's scarred is pretty much dead, so the mechanoreceptors are no longer present. And then I give you another athlete whose hip has, various degrees of freedom with which to deal with variability. It has healthy tissues with healthy mechanical receptors. Who is easier to teach that hook kick to? Now, if you think about how motor learning, the way that your brain learns is by receiving information from the body. So you go try this movement, and your brain actually receives the afferent or the incoming message from the receptors in the tissue. If you have great quality receptors, then your brain is getting good, up-to-date information, and it's going to learn so much faster. So I think one of the major problems is that people are so focused on, I want you to be a better mover, I'm going to make you move better. But really, you're not really working on the movement. You're reverse engineering the movement. You need to make sure that the brain has information, which means that you have to make sure the tissue and the joints are doing their job, and then you're gonna learn that skill way faster. And I think that's something that I think people need to focus more on, is not what you're telling the athlete's brain to try to accomplish, but what the athlete's body is telling his or her own brain.
Mhm.
And that's a huge component of the FRC system.
Yeah, for sure. I get it. I understand it, and it's telling these fighters, these athletes, what we're doing. They bought into the system because they see a difference. So it's not a big deal for me. Like in the beginning, I was kind of just like, they're like, what the hell am I doing? Because they just want to train. They want to train hard. They want to beat themselves into the ground. Dustin and guys that are like at the higher levels and that been in the sport for a while, they try to reach for new ways of getting better. And if we can get them better from a performance aspect, doing new things and new innovative things, they definitely enjoy it and they understand the process that goes behind it. But yeah, I see like I said, I see a big difference.
Yeah, I think when you start to, you take a pro athlete and you show them, okay, so this is what your hip should be doing, and now do a cars. Let me see what your hip does. It's almost, you can't hide from it, eh? Like, athletes are extraordinarily good at compensating. That's one of the reasons why they're great athletes. But when you break down what they're doing and you say, okay, don't show me your turning side kick. I want you to show me how much internal rotation your hip has, and I want you to feel what your hip can actually do. And you do a controlled articular rotation, which of course internet people are like, oh, it's just joint circles. It's not. There's levels to this. So when you do controlled articular rotation, not only can you verbalize and cue the person as to what's not happening, but they have no choice but to feel it. And once you take a pro athlete and you're like, holy geez, man, I can't even move my hip into the position that I know I'm supposed to in order to achieve this position that I'm trying to achieve. It's almost like it's like they learn about themselves. Like, you do cars and you get them to do cars, and that we can call it the entry point of the system. And people within themselves, they start to realize what their capacities are, and then it's very easy to define what is needed from there. So I have really no problems with athlete buy-in. Like when a pro athlete, they fly out to see me, and I'm like, okay, well, let's start at the beginning. You work on from your feet. Your feet have to communicate with the ground. And show me what your foot can do. And they look down and they're like, oh my God, I can't even lift my toe with all of everything else moving. And it's like, well, do you think you need good feet to read the ground? And they're like, of course I do. And they're like, well, damn, let's start with your feet. And they're like, yeah, of course. It's really not a difficult. There's no magic potions here, so you don't have to convince anybody of anything, which I think is why it's so easy to get that buy-in, which is a necessity for good training, of course.
Man, you probably understand it, but most people will be surprised, even though we primarily do a lot of our stuff without shoes. A lot of my fighters cannot isolate a big toe raise. Like, they have no control over it whatsoever. It's like everything just kind of moves together or doesn't move at all. And that kind of goes into like proper movement patterns if you can't do that. And to be honest, and I hate to downgrade my guys because they know I love them, but a lot of people are like, how's it like working with such amazing athletes? And these guys are not particularly, I guess 100% athletic in a sense. A lot of them will trip over their own shoes or trip over their own untied laces, if they run too fast. But it's
not just
bad,
guys. I mean, I've had the privilege of working with the highest level of athlete in various sports, and I mean they've honed their body into doing these specific tasks, and they get amazing at doing it. And you kind of, it walls the body into certain ways of moving, and you're stuck in that path, and to a certain extent you have to be. But if you really study, if you actually study movement creation and what the experts in this field are looking at, they're looking at something what's called dynamic systems theory, which if you want to roll it up into a ball, it's pretty much saying that every time you move, the thing that separates a good mover from a bad mover is their ability to deal with variables. And something like fighting, there's a lot of variables coming at you. So if you're walled off into a very particular pattern, you might have an amazing low kick when you throw it from a good position. But if you're touched off balance, if you don't have the degrees of freedom to deal with the variables, then you're shit out of luck. And that's another thing that, I mean, going back to the toe, if you ask a fighter, like, let's think about this. Like, I pride myself on being a pretty damn good kicker. I mean, if your foot doesn't have the capacity to speak to the ground, you can practice that kick a billion times. It's not going to go well for you, man. Like, if you look at your toe and you say, hey, man, just raise your toe, and people often look down at their foot and they look at it like it's an alien or some kind of object. I mean, that's not acceptable for a fighter. You can't expect your foot to be able to alter position, stabilize, take potential force from the ground and turn it into kinetic force, and do so while another human being is firing off shots at you. I mean, your toe has to be able to raise when you want it to raise. You have to have control in order to effectively execute anything under control.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Now, Jay, I wanted to get this, question out just because I kind of wanted to understand it. But as far as passive stretching before skills training, like such as like BJJ rolling, sparring, wrestling, things like that, do you feel it's necessary, or should we focus on full range of motion, active mobility, and dynamic warm-ups before training? And what do you feel is best overall, or is it just subjective to the individual or for the matter?
The good news is that I don't have to tell you what I feel, because we kind of have answers to these questions, right? In research, right? We don't. It's not 100% clear, but there's enough of it that we can make some pretty darn good conclusions. And let's start with how does an injury occur? An injury can really boil down to a mathematical equation, right? If the load going into a tissue exceeds the load-bearing capacity of the tissue, then the tissue will yield under the load. Now, what do we know about passive stretching? It temporarily decreases your force absorption capacity.
True.
So when you're statically stretching before a roll, what you're doing is, whatever you're stretching, you're pretty much saying, I want you to be able to accept less load, which is another way of saying, I want to increase the chance that you're going to injure. So that's why when you look at static stretching and you look at, does it prevent injuries? I mean, the research at this point, I mean, of course, whatever is right today might be wrong tomorrow, but at this point, it's pretty clear that it's not going to prevent you from injuring yourself.
Yeah.
What would be a better focus is, can you warm up the nervous system in such a way that it can reactively take more force in more variable force applications, which when movement is so chaotic that to be. So I 100% agree. You need a dynamic warm up in order to, if your goal is to try to decrease the chances of hurting yourself in training. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't stretch? Well, that's a horrible conclusion if you actually read the literature, because at other times it's 100% necessary to stretch and to I don't do anything passively, as you know. Our stretching involves stretching with strengthening in combination in very specific ways, which is the best, in my opinion, to number one, become more flexible, and number two, to increase load absorption capacity in your flexibility. So for a warm-up, the answer would be, no, it's not going to decrease your chance of injury. Now, if you're a hockey goalie and you need to get into a split and you're about to play and that's a necessity for your job, or you want to throw head kicks and unless you stretch out, you can't throw head kicks. Well, yeah, sure, go ahead and stretch to the extent that you need, but I would tell you that you should spend more time working on your mobility, which would provide you those ranges of motion all the time, instead of having to foam roll or sit in the splits. Like, if you, not that this is ever going to happen, because this would probably be a weird scenario, but if you were ever, you watch me roll out of bed, I mean, I can roll out of bed and kick you in the head. I can roll out of bed and drop into it in whatever position you want. Now, why? Is because I don't have to sit in an hour and a half long yoga class and warm my tissues and smash them into a foam roller and temporarily deaden the receptors in order to express movement. I train my nervous system to own my movements.
Gotcha.
So from a warm-up standpoint, no, you want more dynamic warm-up, and then past that, it's not to say that stretching is inherently bad, but there are better, more logical ways to achieve what you're actually looking for. And I'll tell you right now, man, people think they want to be flexible. That's just because they don't really have a clear definition as to, they think they want flexible, but what they really want is more control.
Yeah. There's a big misconception between flexibility and mobility, and that's a lot of it. What I, even with my own, private training clients, my general public is, I just try to harp on more, active range of motion than anything, because they're gonna need that more so than anything in their everyday life, so.
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
But and that, I'm glad you cleared that up, because there's a lot of misconceptions from just old school, boxing and karate, karate style, and just sitting in splits and butterflies and things like that. So I'm glad you cleared that up, and I'm hoping that every fighter in here listens to that and takes it into account. Now, I am, like I said before, I am going to go do that Kinstretch certification in a few weeks. Can you talk about what Kinstretch is and why it's better, in my opinion, than yoga?
Well, just first of all, you said that, I didn't, because I don't need my social media inundated with angry, flexible people. I mean, Kinstretch is the application of the scientific principles that I used in the development of, functional range release, functional range conditioning, functional range assessment, but it's the application of it with the ability to do it in a group setting, and it's a body practice. I think that all humans, all athletes, no matter what you do, you want to be a good hockey player, you want to be a good basketball player, you have to practice your body. There has to be some component of your training which is a body practice. Now, something like yoga is a body practice. There's different types of body practices, but if we want to discuss whether or not the different types of body practices adhere to the laws or the knowledge that is freely available in science, that's where we're gonna have a problem. So Kinstretch is saying, so Phil, I'm taking you through a Kinstretch class. Kinstretch is saying, okay, Phil, I want you to practice Phil's shoulder, and I want you to practice Phil's shoulder in various ways in order to maintain the neurological control, maintain the mobility, the capacity for it to move, and then I want you to practice your shoulder in conjunction with your hip, and your hip in conjunction with your knee. And it's really a system of training Phil's body parts in order to work better individually and then to work better together. Now, again, people take this and, people just go crazy on social media. They'll be like, oh, he's crapping on yoga. I am 100% not. But when you get better at holding a particular pose, what you're getting better at is holding that particular pose. And if that's your goal, then by all means, I who am I to tell you what to do with your body, right? But if you want your shoulder to be able to move in a multitude of different directions and to be able to accept or to adapt to variables in real live time, then the principles, they don't match the science. So Kinstretch is a body practice. Going back to BioFlow. Okay, let's give an example. You're going to BioFlow. Somebody might say, what's the best stretch for your adductors? Well, the first question is, what the hell do you mean by your adductors? There's several different adductors, and every single adductor, every single muscle fiber in the adductor longus is within its own right, its own muscle. So there is no the best stretch for your adductor. If someone says you have to stretch in this direction, and I'm like, well, can I stretch in this direction? No, you must go this way. Well, why do I have to go that way? Well, because that's the position I want you in. that person is not understanding the three-dimensional nature of the human body. And if you're using principles that are two-dimensional, like people will come by and in a stretch they'll correct the way you're stretching, and I'll be like, well, no, I feel it in the targeted tissue more if I internally rotate my hip in this position, and the person beside me feels it more when they're in a slight external rotation. Well, who's right? I don't know, man. I wasn't born with the damn stretching, instructional manual, and I don't know who was. But what I do know is the body has to be spoken to, and in the way that it understands. And Kinstretch is a way of training your body in a way that is scientifically relevant and that takes into account a lot of things that science tells us about what should I do to I fix your shoulder with FRC. Well, how do you keep that shoulder working well? Well, you practice shoulder several times a week. So, and that's what Kinstretch is. It's like, it's in my mind, it's a body practice which is enhanced by the injection of science. And I can't think of a better way to practice, my body more than challenging it in multi directions with multiple different ways that increase load absorption capacity and increase capsular health, which then increases afferent feedback to the brain, which increases motor output. I mean, so it's an advanced body practice is what it is.
Awesome.
I mean, I don't have any more questions. You answered them on various levels. I have one question, though, from a listener, Neil Benegas Sabe. He asks, for athletes, how important is pre- or post-workout stretching? Also, how often and under what circumstances should athletes get chiropractic work done?
Oh man, now you're gonna change my inbox from angry flexible people to angry people addicted to cracks and cracking. Okay, so I'm a chiropractor, right? What does that mean? It means that I studied in a school of chiropractic. Now, when an athlete comes to me and they need something, it doesn't matter what I am. What I am doesn't change what they need. Does that make sense? Mm. If I'm standing next to a physiotherapist who's standing next to a massage therapist who's standing next to a medical doctor, and I'm standing in front of a professional athlete, what the athlete needs at that particular time is really independent of what the profession is. So when you say how often do you need to get chiropractic, it depends. When someone comes to see me, the traditional sense of manipulating joints, I mean, I have very specific reasons to manipulate joints, and if those reasons are not present, I am just as happy not to, and I'm just as happy to bring them onto the gym floor and start training their tissue with internal loading or training. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they require manual inputs like soft tissue. Sometimes they require, sometimes they do require manipulation. Sometimes they require mobilization. So it's not a question I can answer unless you give me a client and you allow me to determine what they need. It's a crappy answer, I know, but do I think that someone needs to, randomly go and have all of their joints cracked on a regular basis? I don't think it's necessary. I've been practicing chiropractic for a long time. I've worked from post-surgical patients to people with motor neuron diseases to amateur athletes to professional athletes. I'm doing a pretty good job, I think. I mean, who knows? But I think, and I don't know. I don't do that. It's just not something that I do. I'm not going to sit here and tell other professionals how to practice. But I have a set of, when I assess someone, my job is to try to find out what the client in front of me needs right now and to provide them that. And it doesn't matter what my profession is. What the client needs is what they need. So if you have a chronic problem with the articulation and you need, more inputs into there, then you'll need it more. But if your joint is functioning well, then you can probably do better with spending more time on the gym floor, or even with a chiropractor who is going to take you and teach you how to maintain what you have. Did that answer at least part of that question?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so I think the other part was about stretching. What was it exactly?
How important is pre or post workout stretching?
Okay, so pre-workout stretching, we kind of covered that. If your goal is to prevent injuries, you're not doing that. It's not going to be the way to do it. Post-workout stretching. Again, I never stretch independent. Like, I never only statically stretch. I always say, if you want active results, you cannot rely on passive inputs. Passive inputs give you passive results. Active inputs give you active results. Says who? Says science. The law of specificity, which is one of the most well-studied physiological principles, is very, very clear on this, yeah? So I don't spend a lot of time just passively stretching after training. I will spend time with pails and rails inputs. I will spend time with which I know people might not know what that is, but it's the combination of stretching with end range strengthening, with cars and articular pumping and mobility work and different ways of improving control. But if you're asking me, how much do I tell my pro athletes, how long do I tell them to statically stretch after or before training? I almost never tell them to only statically stretch, and that's the most accurate answer I can give.
All right, I mean, that's all of our questions now. Before we go, for the people that aren't following you yet, could you give them your Twitter, your social media, the Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever you're on? I mean, also, as I mentioned before, functionalanatomyseminars.com is, where they can go to get more information. Also, let them know your YouTube page so they can watch all those amazing videos you have too.
Yeah, my Twitter and my Instagram handles are at Dr. Andreo Spina. Functionalanatomyseminars.com or functionalrangesystems.com will get you to the website. Kinstretch.com as well, if that's more your interest. I believe it's youtube.com/Dr. Andreo Spina or Andreo Spina. That'll do it as well. I would also recommend you kind of find out who my instructors are and follow them, because we do put out as much social media content that learning content that would help people start this process. I'll always say that you can't learn much off Instagram, but if you can learn anything, we try our best to give information. So at Dr. Andreo Spina are Twitter and Instagram, and then those are the websites that I just mentioned.
Nice. All right, Phil, as always, your social?
Instagram and Twitter is at Daru Strong. You can check me out on my YouTube now with at Phil Daru. And then my website is www.darustrong.com. If you have any questions, you can email me, phil@darustrong.com.
As always, remember, you can listen to all of our episodes and on Breaking Muscle at Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Player FM, Google Play Music. Also, you can find us on Facebook at Fight Strength Podcast and on Twitter at FightStrength_. Send us a share our show, send us a message, comment, rating, whatever you want. And thank you again. Big thank you to you, Dre. I mean, thorough information, fascinating stuff. Really, really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy. Really appreciate you coming on the show with us this week.
No, I appreciated the chat, guys. Anytime.
That was awesome. Thank you.
No worries.
That is it. I am Jason Burgos. He is Phil Daru. Until next time, everybody. Bye-bye.